Hello, I'm Tilly and today I'm going to show you exactly how I cut up these lovely big shirts to get the maximum amount of fabric out of them. Now these are 100% cotton and I make quilts out of the fabric from these lovely shirts, and you might be surprised of how much of these shirts I use. I use the plackets down the front here, the buttonhole part. Use all of that, and I use the other side where the buttons are as well. I save all the buttons, and I even use the collar. So I will show you exactly what I use the plackets for and the collars for, and I will show you how I parcel all the components up into these neat little packages, and then I store them in my totes like this. So I'm going to get started and show you exactly how I process these shirts. The tools that I use are really simple. Now I've got two rotary cutters, but I tend not to use the bigger one on these shirts. I find it a lot easier with this little one. And this is a really nice little rotary cutter. Now it's not that expensive. It's a lot cheaper than these bigger ones. And I love this little rotary cutter. So I tend not to use that one with the shirts, but I do use this one a lot, and I use my fabric scissors and my seam ripper. Now they're the only three tools I use. So you can get away, oh, and also the mat. If you use a rotary cutter, you really do need a mat. You can't avoid that. You have to have the mat. But you can get away without using the rotary cutter. You can just use the scissors. If that's all you've got, then use what you've got. You don't need to go out and buy more equipment. So they're nice to have, and they do make it a lot quicker and easier, but not entirely necessary. If you've only got scissors, then just use your scissors. These are fabric scissors, and I do suggest that you do have fabric scissors if at all possible, because they're really nice and sharp and work really well. And then down here at the end of the table, I have this tote that I just chuck everything in. I just slide everything, all the cuttings and the bits of thread, I just slide straight into here. I use this box down here for whatever job I'm doing, whatever sewing job. And it's got quite a lot of different fabrics in there, from quilting, cutting up shirts and other sewing projects. So everything gets slid straight into there. So I start by having all the buttons open on the shirt, and then I start at the collar. And I take these little buttons off here that button down the collar. Now this is the tool that really I have the most accidents with. I always manage to stick it in my finger there at some point. So I just chuck all the buttons into here. And then on the back of there, take out the rest of that thread. And chuck the bit straight in the box down there. Now some shirts have a button on the back of the collar, so do look out for those. So the reason I take all these buttons off around the collar first of all is because you don't want to be cutting through them with your best fabric scissors or your rotary cutter. So take the other one off the other side. Take the threads out. And then the one right at the top of the collar that's actually on the collar. I'll take that one off. Now the next thing I do is to check that there's no buttons on the label here. Now if there's buttons on there, I'll take them. What I do actually is cut the label off. And if it's got buttons on it, I'll chuck it in the box like this. I'll just chuck it in that basket and deal with them later. So the next thing is to cut off this collar. And I use the scissors for this. And I do cut close to the collar, but I don't want to be cutting the actual collar itself because I use that. And I will show you what I use these for. Now, not many people, or actually I haven't seen anybody that says they use the collars. So if you use your collars, I'd be interested to know what you use yours for. I use the scissors for this part purely because there's a lot of layers to go through and I want it to be quite accurate. So then I cut this apart. So I cut where this bottom part of the collar is joined on, I cut that off there all the way along. I'm keeping this part intact because that is the part that I'm going to be using. I love that sound of scissors cutting fabric. It just sounds lovely. So that's the part we're keeping. So I put that to one side. And then I do cut the ends off this. There's a buttonhole in there. So I cut those ends off. Now be careful with the collars. Some collars have a piece of plastic in these corners as a stiffener. So don't be cutting through that with your best scissors either. And then along this seam here, it's top stitched along there. So I cut that stitching off. And this fabric from here will just be used for scraps things. When I want little scraps of fabrics, this is what I use. These bits go straight in the bucket down there into that bin. Now these come apart. So that's a decent amount of fabric there that I can put in the scrap box to be used later. Now sometimes these are attached and sometimes they'll come apart like this. So that one has come nicely apart. And that will also go in the scrap box to be used later. So after I've done the collar, cut the collar off, I cut the cuffs off. Now I just chuck these in there to deal with them later, but I will show you what I do with them. Usually I will just chuck them in there and then cut all these bits apart when I'm sat just relaxing. So take the buttons off first, put them in the button box. And then I just cut this fabric off there at the end. Now this is stitched across here. So I have to bring it in a fairly long way. So this is just another piece that will go in the scrap fabric to be used later. There's the buttonhole there, so I cut that off and then cut the other seam edge off. That will go in the rubbish, and these bits will go in the scrap pile to be used later. I don't keep the interfacing that's already been used. And then I cut this little cuff piece off here. And usually it will go in the basket to be sorted later. But just so, because I'm showing you the video on how I do everything, I'm just going to cut that button off. Button goes in there and that piece goes in the rubbish. Then exactly the same for the other cuff. But for this one, I'm just going to put it in there. Don't need to go through that again. We'll do that piece later. And the same with this. Deal with that later. Now, I turn the sleeves inside out. Hold it by the collar and chuck it out like that. Now I bring one of the sleeves up, and what I'm going to do here is cut from this cuff end all the way down that sleeve, through the armpit and all the way down that seam. So this is one of the fronts and this is the back. So I do this with the scissors. So start at the cuff end where we cut that cuff off and slide those scissors all the way down there. Cut through the armpit and carry on straight down that seam. And then I will do exactly the same with the other side. Obviously being very careful not to cut through any of the fabric underneath. Through the armpit, just give it a little snip, and then all the way down that seam. So now we're going to cut the sleeve off. So I'm just going to move out the way a little bit. So I throw it out like that. Turn it over so you've got the inside facing up. And this is where our little rotary cutter comes in. So when I start with these seams, I always start it there and just pull it back, give myself a little cut at the beginning, so I've got something to hold on to. So then I can just go up that seam, all the way around, over the shoulder. And that's one of the sleeves cut off. So I've just put that to one side. And then we're going to cut this front off. one of the front sides. And this is the top of the shirt, the yoke. So that's one of the front sides. We're going to put that to one side. And we're going to do the same with the other sleeve. So make sure everything else is out of the way. You can feel it through the shirt. So pull that back, then you've got something to hold on to, and just slide all the way around that sleeve. Put that over there. And then cut the other front piece off. And then this is the back part. Lovely big piece of fabric there. And then what I'm going to do here is to cut all this. This is the top of the back. So I'm going to just cut straight across here. All the way through. Put the back to one side, and I use the fabric out of this as well. So I'm going to cut these ends off, and that top piece. And the other side. The other end. And then this bottom part. Slide that lot into the rubbish and separate these pieces. These are what is left of the seams that we've cut off, so they can just go straight in the rubbish. And there's our two pieces. Now I leave these tags on here that tells you the make and the size and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of them have all sorts of different things on there. But on my previous video, I showed you how I source my shirts from Vinted and how I search for them. Now, if I wanted some more of a certain type of fabric that I'd used from one of these shirts, I could search for it by putting the details of this tag into the search engine on Vinted. So those two pieces are ready. So just fold those and put them on the pile. And then we go back to these pieces over here. This is the back. So it's got a little tuck in the back at the top. They don't all have these, and some of them have different ones. So it depends what shirt you're doing as to how much work you need to do here. I just slip that seam ripper through there, and that's opened up. Now, some shirts also have darts in the back to give it shape. So it may have little tucks that you need to unpick as well. So do look out for that as well. So what I'm going to do here is cut off all these outside seams. Now, I tend to throw these away, but sometimes I keep them, especially if it's for a memory quilt, because I try and get them off all in one piece and then use that as the tie to tie around the quilt. And this is the biggest part of the seam. So this is the one I usually use for that job. So I don't go off the edges when I'm trying to keep it all in one piece. And it's tucked under a little bit, so I'll just pull it out a little bit. And there's that lovely big piece there. So most of these I do throw away because I can only use so many of them. But if I'm making a memory quilt, I would definitely keep this piece. And that makes a lovely tie for the quilt. So I'll put that to one side. I'll put that with that lot. And then that piece is then finished and ready to press. I'm going to iron all these pieces. And then this is one of the front sides. And this is the one with the buttonholes on. So first of all, I'll come in and cut this buttonhole piece off, this placket. And I do try not to nick these edges. So I do give it a bit of space. Because there's not a lot you can do, so you can't really open this up and use the fabric because it's got the holes through all the layers from the buttonholes. So we'll keep that piece. And cut this bottom seam off. Into the trash. And cut the armpit seam off. Into the trash. Now the pockets I leave on, especially if it's for a memory quilt, because it's really nice to have a pocket in the quilt where they can put little notes or little mementos from their loved one. So I tend to leave the pockets on. Now if it's not for a memory quilt and I want to use it for another quilt, then I can always cut this off and use this fabric at a later date when I come to use the fabric. So for now, I always leave it on until I know I don't need it. So then we've got the other front panel. And this is the one with the buttons on. So if it's a really nice fabric, then I want to use the fabric. I want to get as much of the fabric out as possible. I will sometimes unpick this with my seam ripper to maximise the amount of fabric I can get. I take the buttons off first and then unroll it all. And you can get quite a bit of extra fabric out of that. But it all does take a lot of time. And then you've got the holes to contend with from the stitching. Now you can get rid of that by one, by washing it, and two, by steaming it. But for now, I've been cutting them off unless it's a special fabric, because like I say, I have got a use for these. So I put that in the basket and we'll just cut those buttons off later. Then we're going to cut this bottom seam off. into the rubbish, cut the armpit seam off, into the rubbish, and then we've got the 2 sleeves. So this is quite simple, just cut the seam off either end, either side. We've got one on this one and one on the other one. So just whip those off and they can go into the rubbish. And then the same with this one. And that's our shirt separated and all the pieces sorted. Now, what we've got here is that piece of the collar. We've got these pieces of scrap fabric that are going into the usable scrap, I should say. And there'll be 2 more pieces like this off that other cuff. We've got the tie that we're going to use to tie the quilt up with. And we've got that placket, the buttonhole placket. Now, other than that fabric, we've got these beautiful big panels of fabric. Now, this is the beauty of using these big shirts. This is a 3XL. Now, in my previous video, when I was searching Vinted, trying to find more shirts to use, I did find a beautiful 6XL shirt. It was stunning. So I will link that video underneath this video in the description. So do take a look at that, because there was a huge amount of fabric in it. So we've got the 2 sleeves. We've got the 2 fronts. I mean, look at the amount of fabric in those. It's just wonderful, isn't it? And then we've got this beautiful big back panel. How wonderful that is. A huge piece of fabric. I'll just measure that. That's 71 centimetres across, which is 28 inches. 69 there at the narrowest part on the waist area. That's a huge amount of fabric, isn't it? And even on this top area, 53 centimetres. And the length is 65 centimetres. So that's a huge panel of fabric, isn't it? So then we've got the 2 from the top of the back. So the yoke part from the back. 2 nice little panels there. So what I'm going to do now is to iron these. You don't really want to be watching me doing that, I'm sure. So I'll do that off camera, and then I'll show you how I get them into these neat little parcels that keep it all together, all these components in one of these little parcels, which are great for storing it. So it's all nicely ironed, and I just fold the sleeves in half and then in half again. Fold that in half and then half again, just so it's a nice size really. So I'll do the same with the other one. Fold it in half again, in half and in half again. Really simple. So this is one of the fronts. So just fold that in half and in half again. And exactly the same, in half and in half again. And the same with the other one. These are the two back pieces off the top of the back. So I just fold those in to the centre like that. Same with this one, just fold it in 1/3 and then in 1/3. And I have that piece on the top. So that's our little components. And then we have the big back piece. I don't put these little pieces in, the collar and the cuff parts and all that. I just put the fabric in that I'm going to use for the quilts or whatever I'm going to use it for. So I have it so the wrong side is facing up. Now it's really difficult to tell which is the wrong side on some of the shirts, but it doesn't matter too much. And I have the smallest part at the top. So where the arm sort of cut off, where it goes in. Put that pile on there and bring this over the top so it just covers that pile there. Fold that edge in and fold that edge in. I only do this because they are such big shirts. And then bring that over the top. It's really simple to do this. And that one over the top. And then take that rest of it and put that over the top of the whole lot. Turn it over. And we're going to tuck it into this little pocket here. But what I tend to do is fold that over first. And then just tuck that into that pocket. Trying to keep it as flat as possible. There, and that's all there is to it. Really simple and keeps it all nice and neat, all the bits together. So then we've got these other pieces, the buttonhole plackets and the one where the buttons was on as well. So all of those and all of those collars, the bottom part of the collars, and we're going to use them as bag handles, and they are perfect for bag handles. So here are some of the bags that I've got at the moment that I've made using these shirt parts for the handles, and they're brilliant. They are perfect size. Now, I don't bother cutting off all these little bits of fabric off the edges because they will fray and it actually gives a nice effect. And I think it's nice to have to show the authenticity of the bag or whatever it is you're making. So it's nice to be able to see that it's a shirt, part of a shirt. I like that. Now these was curtains, both for the inside and the outside, and these are actually reversible as well, so you can have it either way. So this one is just the same, and these are shirt handles, and I don't even worry about having them the same. See, they're different patterns of different shirts. I like that. I think that's really nice. It's just my quirkiness. And then there's this one. See, the handles, there's similar colours, but they're just off different shirts. And isn't that beautiful? And the grey, this was curtains, and this grey fabric was from a box of scraps that I got from Pound Fabrics. It was in the box of scraps, and it's got a little bit of stretch to it. I wasn't sure what I could do with this grey fabric, but it worked perfectly for lining this bag. And the collars will also be used for handles, just for smaller ones, for smaller bags, or just even with tote bags, but if you want smaller handles on them. They work exactly the same way. So they work perfectly, don't they? Absolutely brilliant. So I would be really interested to know what you do with yours, if you've found another use for these other pieces of the shirts and the shirt collars and all those bits and pieces. So let me know what you do with yours, if you've got any suggestions. So, and also I did mention this in my previous video, but these buttons that I save, if I can't use them all myself, then I will sell these on Vinted. When I've got enough of them, I'll put them on Vinted to get money to buy more shirts for the charity quilts. So that's why I save all the buttons as well. Do subscribe if you find this sort of content interesting. Click the like button if you've enjoyed it. And hopefully I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.